I'm going to talk about Roy from Fire Emblem The Binding Blade for a bit. We've all known this was coming, the signs were obvious. I'm a Binding Blade apologist, get your contempt out of your system, but I'm not here to try to justify low hit rates or how, after Chapter 15, the game is a death march of comically large maps of chunky enemies. My intent is a lot more basic. People don't like Roy because he sucks. His bases are low, his growths aren't exciting, he promotes like one chapter before the end of the game, or at least one chapter before an end of the game. We all know this. But I like him for a couple reasons. Firstly, he's not supposed to be good. Prior to Roy, our lords have been Marth, Alm, Celica, Marth again, Sigurd, Seliph, and Leaf, and all of those besides Leaf have a divine call to power and authority. Leaf kind of does too, but his story also meaningfully concerns his relative lack of divinity compared to his sister's holy blood. Largely, at this point, Fire Emblem was a series that concerns itself with the hereditary lineage of righteous power. Marth descends from the hero king Henri. Alm and Celica are touched by the divine dragons and are both the true inheritors of Rigel and Zofia, respectively. Sigurd carries the holy blood of the crusader Baldur, as does his son. Technically, Roy shares this same storyline, but how that's worked out is what I find interesting. Roy is, diegetically speaking, bad at fighting. No, he's not incompetent, but he wasn't trained to be a general. His role was more geared towards inheriting his father's title in the Lycian Alliance, and his role in the story was to more or less pass off the small group of forces he's gathered to General Hector. But Hector is killed on his dying breath by the time Roy reaches him, so he has to instead lead the army himself, a young boy inheriting a war. So, I kind of like that he's bad in the game, and that the game goes on to frame Roy's strengths not as a prodigy of combat, but as a relatively compassionate, cool-headed idealist. He ends the game in the true ending, reckoning with a philosophical issue of what to do with a fire dragon that has been broken and refined as a tool for war. Another figure plucked from their own life and converted into a vessel for violence. That the best ending is his effort to give her a new chance at living feels like a rare moment of actually coherent storytelling in the series, and I think that goes understated in the fan community. The second reason I like him is both simpler and more relevant. He's a sweet boy. He's nice in that, generic anime polite boy way. I like that. It feels wrong though, right? He talks about having friends supporting him and how he doesn't like taking life and all the stock lines you'd expect from a character like him, but he's also out there killing guys, and if you're not skilled or don't care to reset, a lot of those friends of his can end up dead. It rings a little hollow, and it's an interesting disconnect. Roy is a character that both makes a lot of thematic sense in the grand scheme of the story, and also feels tonally absurd in the granular beat-to-beat game. What do we do with this? Who cares? Let's talk about one of the most reviled games of the series. So, a good while ago, I participated in a poll held by one ex-FE tuber, Professor Bopper, which placed Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE at number 15 out of 22, which is honestly pretty good for a game that is often brought to the terminally online Fire Emblem discourse table just to laugh at and move on from. In a way, this game is considered not Fire Emblem, which is a shame because it is also in a very real way the best Fire Emblem in the series. It's also about as good as Persona 5. I should show my work. Okay, so TMS brings to the table some extremely basic narrative tools that Fire Emblem proper just doesn't, right? A lot of this is explained through the necessity of FE's general mechanical burdens of having a big cast that is mostly expendable, but that does leave TMS in a great spot to fill that niche. Fortuna Entertainment is staffed with 11 characters, only 7 of which are combat units, making it the trimmest FE party by a long shot. Aside from Ayaha, Subasa's oldest sister, you rescue in Chapter 1, all 10 of these characters are deeply intertwined into the story as it progresses, which obviously makes the cast fuller and richer. On just this merit alone, that TMS feels like it has an unserious story to tell is largely irrelevant, as it is a story where you're not spending a weird amount of time collecting a bunch of characters that have a couple moments on screen before shuffling off into the barracks to be expended. Funny enough, TMS also fills a really interesting niche as a Persona-esque game featuring Well, okay, they aren't all adults, but it's distinctly a game about youths in real locations like Shibuya having a secret double life saving the world from sinister evil. But notably, there's no high school stuff. Oh, sure, Itsuki, Tsubasa, Toma, Eleonora, they're all, as a strict matter of the text, in high school. They have uniforms and classmates, but you're so not in high school that your high school is a location that you're in for the opening moments of the game and literally never again. The high school classroom you're seeing on the screen right now, that's a film set where they shoot high school scenes. Instead, your party all have jobs in the entertainment industry, and developing their side stories is intertwined with their professional aspirations. It is, in a pretty incredible way, the thing that a lot of Persona fans have been asking for while conveniently pretending that Shin Megami Tensei Persona 2 Eternal Punishment doesn't exist. And yet, the general online assessment of this game is kind of divisive and dismissive. People will look at the glittery J-pop soaked exterior and write it off as a silly anime game beneath consideration. There are complaints of it not using any of the Fire Emblem part of this crossover, that it's not even particularly edgy for an Atlas title, that it's insubstantial, cheesy, and apparently ground zero in a war waged against the forces of censorship. The totality of this game's presence, its subcultural legacy, its position in a long-running culture war nightmare, its bizarre attention to production values. There is kind of a lot about this game. It's big, bright, vibrant, loathed by both its fandoms, and yet ultimately the conversation about this game tends to be brief, shallow, and not really about the game itself. People will use this game as a prop for a bigger conversation, but actually meaningfully looking at the game itself is kind of hard to come by, short of like professional journalists giving like a pretty standard neutral rundown of what the mechanics are with nothing else to go through it. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're also going to talk about how both fandoms treat this game. And we're also going to talk about censorship. And I might even get into the act of media criticism in the age of the internet for some reason, because of this single game. What the fuck? So, I'm pretty sure that I've gotten so deep into private, aggrieved conversations with friends that this idea, Hangout core, is something that doesn't seem to be a publicly recognized thing. So, in brief, it's a term that I and some ornery friends of mine have taken to dubbing the kind of game, mostly but not always RPGs, that have a pretty strong emphasis in being comfortable as a thing you can kind of hang out in. It's different than games like Animal Crossing, which are designed explicitly to be games you load up and vibe in. These are still RPGs with plots and characters and a story and an arc, resolutions, etc. But the game is big and cozy and has a lot of downtime to soak in. Things like Fire Emblem Three Houses, where you spend a lot of time at the monastery talking to students, doing activities, fishing, even deep into a revolutionary war, or like modern Persona, like yes, even Persona 3 is kind of like this, though I defend that they're very purposeful in doing this because spending time hanging out with people comes at very little conflict with the burden of the plot. And yeah, I already made a big video about this, go watch that. But a lot of time and energy is put into making the game, on some level, cozy enough that you can feel like you can live in it. These two series in particular are kind of obsessed with the setup because it does them a lot of good. They both tend to have casts that largely take a backseat to the main plot, pivoting around the main character and principal supporting roles. Three Houses has, like, over 35 characters, but most of the stuff that happens in the game hinges on Byleth and the Three Lords. Persona 4 has a much smaller party, but the game's only real narrative constant gravitates around the MC. As a result, there are a ton of characters on the sidelines, and the hangout core parts of these games gives you a lot of free time to get to know them. If it sounds like I'm being mean or saying this is strictly bad as a trend in video games, I'm not. But I can see where a reliance on character development as an a la carte service provided to the player can cause some pretty rough side effects to the piece as a whole. Okay, I feel like I make this argument every other video these days, but a lot of games from these series have found themselves struggling to really do the necessary things to make the story more compelling than it is. Persona 4 and 5 are grandiose in ambition, but have to essentially travel from set piece to set piece to hide the fact that the characters they introduced so strongly can't ever reckon with too serious an arc in the main plot since their stories are optional. Similarly, Fire Emblem's modern takes have been pretty regularly toothless, too afraid to genuinely harm the player's progression because it's better and easier to maintain a gameplay loop that is constantly satisfying you, the player. These two problems may seem wildly different, but they converge on the same point to help cover up some weaknesses. Yes, the character development in P4 and 5 feels front-loaded and tends to stagnate as the story continues, but social links are usually pretty snappy and well-written and reward you directly for investing in characters that you want to invest in. You can get to know anyone in your party pretty well in these games, provided that you're okay with the fact that these side arcs are simultaneously textually supported as meaningful enough to ascend their personas, while also not interfering with their behavior in the main plot. On the Fire Emblem side of things, while it's a little more complex a problem that we will get into shortly, the basic issue hinges on an over-reliance of the self-insert, treating these games like a dating sim with an, on average, 45 romance options. As a matter of logistics, you're not going to get a lot of depth from casts this big, but you can atomize their character as less a coherent arc and more a series of deep lore vignettes, the support system in a nutshell. The end result is the same. The player is given incredible discretion on taking what they want out of their product, how they please, with no narrative cost. How does this compare to Tokyo Mirage sessions? Well, it does the same thing. It's just that it works better here than arguably any of the games I've talked about. Let me set the scene a little bit. The game hinges on the exploits of Fortuna Entertainment, an entertainment agency working on developing the professional careers of performers in Japan who have the potential to fight alongside Mirages, enigmatic figures from another world. The main character, Itsuki, helps his childhood friend Tsubasa in her goal to be an idol, and in the process gets wrapped up in this company. Through the story, Itsuki ends up leading the team through several trials, uncovers the secrets of the Mirages and the idolospheres they come from, saves the world, and in the best ending, takes over the company as the new president. TMS, however, does the same structural tricks that Persona and Fire Emblem do, with the same a la carte side content for you to pick through at your leisure. This content similarly can't have real narrative traction because it is all optional, but there's a reason I've titled this section the way I did, and it is because the context of the game is so synergistic with the setup. Let's break down a Fire Emblem support. Most of these supports, especially from Awakening onward, have to be built between everything two characters can contextually understand from the moment the two of them are recruits in your army and no later. Some older titles circumvented this, and even Three Houses take steps to lock off levels until after the time skip or other important events, but by and large, they are stories that have to rely on the baseline interactions of character tropes. Character A does something weird that character B responds to in some way that draws a superficial conflict. That gets aggravated in the next conversation, potentially with one of the characters revealing the reason why they act the way they do, which culminates in a resolution in the final support. There are exceptions, obviously, but the broader points remain. The support conversation is a lightweight bit of character writing that has, in modern times, been overly congratulatory towards the characters involved, with the most recent mainline series being particularly frustrating in this regard. The biggest issue for me and the purposes of this argument is that the context surrounding these conversations are nebulous and change pretty consistently, and as a result, the supports feel insular in a way. Like, y'all remember that Leone support that unlocks after Gerald dies? It makes sense to unlock it because it should hold meaning to Leone, and since the game can't account for when you develop enough points with her to achieve your side of the conditions needed, you get to have a series of main plot scenes about his death. The monastery music changes entirely to reflect this gloomy loss, and in comes Leone picking fights with you because she wanted to believe she was his best apprentice, all happening in a time where her monastery dialogue has her barely coherent, stricken with grief. The Persona social links are definitely better in a few ways. The amount of time to develop them, there are 10 stages instead of 3, and their rewards tend to be way more tangible and evident to most players, but functionally the same core problem arises. Leone and Haru are basically in the same position, and technically the same can be said for everyone in TMS, but the context is a huge asset. Rather than being set to an epic war or layered on top of high school obligations already layered on top of a grotesque nightmare scenario, the offset to the Mirage Idolosphere dungeon crawling is career development. Tsubasa Oribe, Juhachsaides, has to overcome a lot of hurdles in this game on her way to stardom. How to commit to herself as a singer, then a model, then an actor, but along the way, these angles get extra attention. How do you handle a meet and greet if you've never done one before? How do you write and sing a flirty song and have the confidence to act in the commercial the song's written for? Her final side story deals with her getting a deal to have a titan in the industry write her new single before finding out that he's slowly getting drained by a mirage that killed his love and is using her performa, which is kind of like your creative energy, to manipulate him. She commits to her heart and her song loud enough that it dispels the illusion and you fight for his soul, and it ends with her performing said new hit. These aren't super complicated, dark stories, but that also works in the game's favor. See, this setup transcends the medium because it lends itself to the particular intermingling going on. See, in modern Persona, your team leads covert double lives. In theory, you are fighting, honing battle skills so that you may ultimately live in a world where you don't need them any longer. But TMS's combat is woven into their own spirit and capabilities as performers. These are skills your friends are honing that they would want to hone otherwise. It makes the fiction of this game, starting and stopping at your demand, easier to comprehend compared to trying to pretend that Chie totally gets why you can't go into the TV to save her best friend because you have to hang out with Yosuke so that a weird man in a room no one but you knows about will make a slightly stronger Ouroboros. And while we're here, let's not sugarcoat it. The camp, the lighthearted cheese, these are things the game thrives with. Far from undermining or debilitating the story, front and center in TMS's desire is to be a love letter to the performing arts. And as all art about the act of making art, it indulges in self-reference and pastiche, in tropes that are lampshaded and played straight right after anyway. It is a deeply unserious game on some level, but it indulges in its premise sincerely. How sincerely? Well, Atlus and Nintendo contracted Avex Group to compose and choreograph all the routines in the game, Avex being an entertainment conglomerate that's been in the business for roughly 40 years. The principal 7 cast members are all trained singers so that they could sing the songs their characters do. It's why, if you see the choreography and the routines, it feels kind of grounded and human. It's because they were made and modeled by real dancers to give that kind of captivating mismatch of grounded movements and stages that are pure fiction. Yes, sadly all is not well in the critical assessment of Tokyo Mirage Sessions' Sharp FE. Despite a cursory look into the development showing anyone that a lot of thought was put into this game, it seemed to have failed to live up to the expectations for the fans. And to be fair, Fire Emblem fans and Shin Megami Tensei fans had a lot to expect from a collaboration. Look at the comments left on the various reveal and launch trailers when the game had development footage to speak of.
I'm still mad, goddamn!
You, me, and everyone expecting a good game to actually be made.
Ugh, this weebo crap. They're ruining Fire Emblem.
Remember SMT Cross FE? Remember how cool it looked 3 years ago? Now look at this. We failed.
I, once again, won't be supporting this game until we get confirmation that this weeb BS won't be influencing future SMT games.
Fire Emblem plus SMT divided by Persona equals some magical girl divided by Japan Idol game.
This game is an insult to both Fire Emblem and Persona.
Fire Emblem X Shin Megami, and we got this J-pop anime crap.
I don't understand. I love Atlus games, I love Fire Emblem, and I love anime. How come I can't get hyped for this in the slightest?
Way to go, Atlus. You've permanently sealed Shin Megami Tensei's fate as just another anime game in the eyes of people who are new to the series. Really hoping you'll turn things around with Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse and avoid the same storytelling blunders of Shin Megami Tensei 4. Shin Megami Tensei 4 was a good game, what?
Where are the SMT at, Atlas? Where is the Demi-Fiend? Where is Raido Kuzunoa? Where is Lucifer, Yahweh, Metatron, Mastema, and all the other demons?
The entirety of modern manga anime cliches in a nutshell.
Expectation. SMT X FE is going to be an awesome crossover that celebrates both franchises. Demons, swordsmen, other little funny creatures, and you fight the devil and god dragons. reality, anime, J-pop, cutesy, derp.
It was meant to be a Fire Emblem cross Shin Megami Tensei. This is just bad.
The game about demons and the alignments of society, and the game about medieval warfare and the discrimination against animal/dragon people made this.
This game is why I have trust issues.
Persona 4 looks edgier than this.
If you look at the original Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem trailer on January 23rd, 2013, it showed various Shin Megami Tensei characters epically displayed alongside Fire Emblem characters.
We get off on your tears!
Signed, Atlas.
That moment when a game crosses over two franchises, but for some reason it has barely any resemblance to either.
Jesus Christ, kill me now. I thought this was a crossover, not a sequel to Conception. I don't know what Conception is.
I love it when I'm lied in the face too.
This video single-handedly killed the SMT fanbase.
We truly are living in the worst timeline.
Shin Megami Tensei equals manly. Fire Emblem equals good. Shin Megami Tensei / Fire Emblem equals kawaii sugoi. Thanks, Atlas.
Wow. Tragic. This trailer that got mentioned must have made some huge claims about the game, right? Like maybe something big and bold about the setting, who would be in it, how the game would play, and for the sake of honesty, fairness, and journalistic integrity, I am going to play you the entirety of this trailer now so that you can see for yourself what has gotten them so up in arms. I'm even going to take a moment to crack open a crisp, hopefully not room temperature root beer from the fridge. I'm sure I'll be done by the time this epic trailer is finished. Fuck. The way people talk about this made it seem like SMT x FE was already made. Dark, brooding, edgy. Fire Emblem, but people say fuck and there's blood everywhere. Shin Megami Tensei, but Fire Emblem. This sentiment of betrayal is so captivating and pervasive that in a lot of ways it seems the fandoms both were incapable of actually assessing the story. I could, if I really wanted to, try and paint a picture of TMS as secretly more complicated and deep than it appears, but that is only true insofar as any good epic musical is. There is drama to be had, there are plenty of heartfelt sentimental moments, it's not utterly facile, it's not just a meaningless pageant, but it also doesn't really invest itself in trying to pretend it's something that it's not. The ones bringing that particular imposition to this game are the aggrieved fans. And this isn't to demand everyone love this game, even though it is good, but to release yourselves from the desire to pathologize it, to soothe your ego. You can, in fact, just not like something. The studies have come in. I'm not even saying that every criticism I've laid at your feet, dear viewer, is invalid. This game is not to everyone's taste, but the visceral sense of betrayal is infectious. No wonder it's so hard to genuinely talk about the game on its own merits. I'm trying to do that in this video, and I keep getting pulled into talking about discourse instead. So, why? What are the complaints? What is missing from this game that makes it the black sheep of two big series? It's easy and tempting to point the finger at the villain that is the anime aesthetic, especially considering how much of a negative opinion the internet seems to have around it. I just don't buy it, though. Like, they don't mean that in this case, right? Fire Emblem, especially modern FE, is anime as fuck, and Shin Megami Tensei is almost more so in some iterations, but it's an easy way to dismiss something without giving a more complex answer, or worse, exposing something about yourself. Perhaps the more honest complaint is that it looks silly and glittery, and it's embarrassing to consider playing it, because what if your mom walks in on you playing it? A thing that actually did happen to me with this very game, but it's a fun game, Mom, and it's not cringe to like a game about J-pop. Mom, fuck! Anyway, let's pick this apart more, because in the act of researching this, of listening to voices from both fandoms, a lot of complaints overlap. But a few don't, and I'm going to be thorough in exploring these, because, for starters, Fire Emblem fans seem to not understand their own series. Also, I think it was my dad that walked in on me playing Tokyo Mirage Sessions. I want to start with Fire Emblem, my original love, because I think the bulk of complaints I see unique to FE fans are a little easier to get into. So, the big thing is that a lot of the fan response seems to hinge on them wasting the FE side of the crossover. There are iconic FE characters in this game, but they're all, like, Stans and Tiki, who's a Vocaloid. Where's the Fire Emblem? We wanted Shin Megami Tensei levels of intensity, but with FE mechanics. Wait, what's this Devil Survivor footage doing here? Stop, take it down, stop. So this is fine enough, right? Like, on some level, I get wanting to play Fire Emblem. The gameplay is the game's best feature, and not having it can feel a little disappointing. Though I do kind of find this argument a little strained, considering that FE now has a pretty robust history of spin-off titles that don't play like Fire Emblem, but fair enough. If it's not to the fans' taste to play a more standard JRPG, who am I to judge? But I will stand for a couple interesting mechanics that are both inspired from Fire Emblem and in a way meaningfully improve the concept. And so, yes, people have brought up that the game does the weapon triangle and has super effective attacks, and as such, the game is less guessing and more recognizing that some enemies will reliably have exploitable weaknesses and capitalizing on them. But the interesting thing I want to make a case for here is the class change system. So, history lesson. Class changes have been a thing in Fire Emblem since the beginning, yes, but the system was mostly untouched, save some minor improvements like getting to promote most every basic class into a promoted class, or that time Radiant Dawn made a super tier above promoted classes, or that time Sacred Stones made a scrub tier for classes. It's a fine enough idea, but Sacred Stones also brought with it the idea of branching promotions, which was fun. It gives a lot of the playable cast a neat amount of flexibility. This idea was iterated on in Awakening, but with an added twist. See, the remakes of Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem made reclassing a mechanic, where you can rotate most any unit save Marth and some specialty units like Thieves or Dragons into any other class, more or less. This was fine, but weirdly balanced, in that in lower difficulties it feels more like a novelty, and in higher difficulties it's just an excuse to turn your big hitters into wyverns. Awakening married these ideas and gave each unit a limited number of classes they could swap into, each with a branching promotion. The idea was to make every unit both highly customizable and yet retaining a core identity. It's a nice idea, but it's a strained one because Fire Emblem is beholden to dominant strategy, like most any game out there, and soon enough it was less a game about making interesting creative choices and more a game about using the parent-child mechanics to invent the most optimized monsters you could. Subsequent games would continue with the system, constantly tweaking and trying to make it more in-depth, more creative, and ultimately, the two most recent titles more or less gave everyone access to all the classes, with the existence of their own personal skills to help try and dictate a direction to build them in. Does this work? Not really. Again, dominant strategy comes into play, and Three Houses and Engage both kind of collapse into a few specific comps to obliterate the game. Here's footage of someone speedrunning the Crimson Flower path of Three Houses by swapping Edelgard into a wyvern and using her axe to Gale Force her way into victory. Wow. Tokyo Mirage Sessions misses out on some of these problems by not being an SRPG, obviously, but the branching promotion system is here. All 7 of your main party members can promote into one of 2 directions, and while you can get a bunch of Master Seals and push them into other paths to unlock the other set of weapons, for the mid-game, this system has a pretty significant sway on how each party member develops, and it's particularly interesting because there's very little overlap between the 7 of them. You can't really make any of them replace any other in their assigned strengths and weaknesses, and with the addition of duo performances and sessions, the game incentivizes you developing everyone, since everyone will be pretty regularly contributing to the combat. The system actually captures the heart of class changing, giving you a lot of discretion, but keeping each character feeling genuinely unique. And yes, dominant strategy comes into play here too, but it does so in a way that I think is mechanically really interesting in its own right, because there's not so much a flattening of use these 2 party members in this way and win everything, as much as the game, the deeper you get into it, funnels you down a path for everyone in the team, namely hyper-aggression. Here's the thing. In a lot of SMT titles, there is a definite ebb and flow in tactics. You need healing, you need to exploit weaknesses, you need to know when to charge or concentrate and unload the big bucks, buff, debuff. It's all pretty complicated. Tokyo Mirage Sessions has all of this, it's true, but it's a little bit more binary, a little bit more extreme. Modern Persona will toy with your heart by giving you semi-early access to something like Sukukaja, a spell that buffs one of your 4 party members' hit and evasion for 3 turns, holding out on the bigger, better buffs until late mid-game. Sukukaja in this game is low cost and buffs the entire party. You can get revival beads as a semi-infrequent drop in Persona 3 or for a pretty steep cost early game, and those will revive a unit up to half health. In TMS, they restore you up to 75%, and the store brand version does about the same for way cheaper. They are so good that by the time you get Recarm unlocked in Tsubasa, it's likely that you may not even consider adding it to her list. Why? You're likely already sitting on 40 fresh curries, and she really should be using her precious 6 skill slots on something more important. She has access to wind magic, lance skills, fire magic if you make one of her rare weapons, and she has a radiant skill that chains sessions when she does a lance attack on enemies afflicted with a certain status ailment, so giving her sexy dance to inflict charm on enemies can make openings on foes that otherwise might not. The deeper you get into this game, the more power that gets relegated to sessions, the more the game makes you realize that a lot of things can be offset by the fact that items are cheap, money is plentiful, and aggression pays off. More than that, you eventually unlock a free Endures a Fatal Blow with 1 HP for both physical and magical attacks separately. So, depending on who you're fighting, healing becomes a pretty specific tactical move, since the turn you waste topping everyone off every time you get hurt won't accomplish anything, and attacking until you're right at the edge and then popping a Medea Han or Mamori's microwave special that restores everyone back to full HP and gives her a free turn right after. Like, that has literally no opportunity cost outside of expending an SP point, something that you can recover anyway through sessions. That becomes the priority. The game encourages turning almost your entire party into tools designed with expansive toolkits for attacking enemies, and it results in combat that I found wildly addicting. Knowing exactly when to pull out really specific support moves, debuffs, reflex, becomes this carefully considered dance, and this isn't even considering how much luck can factor in, and you'll get an ad-lib performance, or a chain out of another duo art, some of which can also just heal the entire party back to full. It kind of feels insulting that the combat in this game is so regularly written off, because it cuts a really exceptional balance between the highly nuanced SMT style of gameplay, something they can get away with because parties are largely built around theoretical access to anything in the game that's feasibly available. You can always recruit more demons, fuse them, swap them in and out, and oftentimes MCs are themselves highly customizable, or in the case of Persona games, your MC has access to any of these moves personally, divorced entirely from your party. Izuki doesn't have this. He's very useful in some regards. He has a handful of super effective attacks, lightning magic, charge and concentrate both, and 2 ad-libs, but he isn't a wild card. You have to rely on your party to fill out his weak spots, something they all can do to certain degrees. Even Yashiro, the other sword user in the team, plays radically differently, being the only character who has access to counter skills, which will soak the next direct physical attack directed at him, and gets a free hit in, as well as both fire and wind skill access. Ellie and Toma are both big physical brawlers, but also have the niche of a support skill that can delay enemy turns, which is a crazy boon to have, especially since it can activate in-session attacks. Kiria is both the simplest character with just magic access, but also has a massive variety of spells and support skills that constantly refresh her EP. Mamori gets no ad-libs, but she's both a tank that can take hits for other party members, and again has access to 2 of the best healing moves in the game, hands down. The game's mechanics are tantalizing in a way that just gets me. I don't know. I do want to bring up one more thing before we get to the SMT side of things, and that's tone. See, both parties here got pretty ornery with the game's sunny disposition, both pointing out that their game series is dark and serious and edgy, and where the SMT crowd has at least some precedent for that. I have to say that FE fans do not get their own series if that's what we truly believe. Like there is a difference between dark and dramatic. Shin Megami Tensei ends its first major act with a nuclear apocalypse ending the world. Fire Emblem will kill the protagonist's dad. we are not the same. And frankly, that's okay. Aspiring to have Fire Emblem but dark and fucked up is kind of like wanting edgy Pokemon. It's a denial of sentimentality as meaningful, instead insisting that depth and complexity and legitimacy are only given to things that are a particular kind of violent, a particular kind of gratuitous and grim. But I am ultimately sorry to the FE fans wondering how their favorite series got into a cool crossover and got this. The camp is coming from inside the house. I know that I have kind of dug myself into being something of an Engage hater. It's a difficult position. I can promise you that I've played it 3 times and had a relatively good time each time, but Engage is kind of living proof of the weird struggles I'm trying to express here. See, in a way, Tokyo Mirage Sessions is like almost comprehensively better Engage. Yes, it doesn't have Engage's gameplay, fine, but everything Engage wants to be as a game, a story, a piece of art, TMS has done to a much greater extent. Let's start with the obvious. Engage has a particular hang-up with its characters. This may be the part that gets me some heat from the community, and I just want you to know that I'm doing this because I'm a media critic and a hater, but Engage's characters just aren't that deep. Like, yes, you can mine through their myriad supports and find traumatic lore extant in almost everyone's pasts in that game, and that's the heart of the problem here, and it's a problem in 2 directions. Firstly, this method of building characters seems to make some FE fans lose their goddamn minds because they will seek a deep lore rundown of their Blorbo and go, how dare you say Yunaka is a shallow character? She has a dark past and is trying to be a better person. And while that's all true, it's not really something that meaningfully informs the character as part of the main story. See, the problem with support conversations in Fire Emblem is interesting, because they originated in FE6, and likely as a means to flesh out characters in a game that has no real room for them. But as the series gained popularity, and this mechanic became more desired because it's quick and easy and fills out characters as you play with them, it's since then morphed less into a way to characterize units in your army, and more just the way to describe characters for the benefit of people who want to know anything substantive about them. And since the structural nature of supports can't allow of any of the actual development from this to affect their role of the story, the actual characterization of any modern FE character is reduced to the quickest, least substantive thing you can get across in a few lines of dialogue they'll get in the story. This guy likes cooking. This girl loves you. This girl is hiding her dark past. This guy talks funny. It does the characters a disservice in the sense that whatever would make them interesting is both incapable of making the character develop in an interesting way in the story, and also leaves fans of any given character hung up on basically inventing fanfiction to backfill complexity into them. I say this as someone who in their early 20s did this so hard I contributed to the Fates Awakening gay marriage hacks almost explicitly to write such fanfiction. I know this pain distinctly. The other part of this problem is that Engage is constantly trying to apologize for its perceived superficiality. In a way, Engage suffered a microcosm of the blowback TMS did for a lot of similar reasons. It's bright and sparkly and seems insubstantial as a result. The characters are all from maximalist TikTok, and fans balked at this as something silly and not worth considering. Maybe a refreshing break from the toil of Three Houses discourse, sure, but Engage couldn't commit to it. I said this more or less in my Engage vid, but Engage falls short of Awakening being camp and brave enough to own it. Characters have dramatic beats, the villains are an arms race of comically overstated evil, but in doing so, these little moments of sentimentality shine through. In contrast, Engage is so busy trying to assert that it's more than what you see on the tin, but it doesn't put in the work to actually do that. It wants to be serious and make you take it seriously, but has to make everyone in your army love you in case you want to marry one of them. It has a comically evil villain, but he's also your abusive dad, and you're protecting your sister, and it's a story about trauma and abuse, actually, but also your mom loves you so much that she dies twice and gets 2 heartfelt goodbyes. The game wants to ascend you to godhood, or emblemhood, whatever, but it can't make the transcendence of Alir's body a real act with real stakes, because the game is, first and foremost, about your satisfaction. It's so much about your satisfaction that it breaks down halfway through, trying to give you everything it can to make you happy. It's edgy, it's deep, it's lighthearted. You can't be mad about it not being too deep, but also everyone is traumatized and your friend. You're the most important person ever, and you can sacrifice yourself heroically and are gifted divinity, and also you're just like everyone else. This kind of struggle makes Engage really tedious to unpack because it's hard to really give a definitive answer to what makes its characters bad when the people asking have decided that lore is equivalent to good writing. Like, the answer is that the characters are poorly executed, regardless of any on-paper depth. Alfred is just a guy who says affirming things to you as plot happens around him, so any depth he might actually have is a treat for you, but is otherwise meaningless. Let's look at a sad dad situation in TMS. Yashida's dad died 5 years ago, and instead of that being a backstory that you have to dig into on his side content, it is something that is built into the story. Garnef took his Performa 5 years ago and uses it alongside his stand user Hatanaka to bring forth Medius. It's not the kind of show-stopping traumatic abuse lore or whatever, but it incorporates Yashida's story into the main narrative, so fighting Hatanaka and Garnef in Chapter 6 feels like a meaningful part of his story. He gets his part of the story to feel a little more real. In addition to all of this, the fact that your party is employed by Fortuna for this purpose does a lot of groundwork to blend everything more easily. By taking things less seriously, by not hounding on the player that these characters are secretly big fucked up, the tone of the piece clicks together, and the actual moments where the story is a little darker shine. This, ultimately, is what I mean when I say that TMS is comprehensively better. Engage tries to be too much at once. A wacky, glamorous dating sim, a love letter to Fire Emblem, a secretly dark story about family and trauma. It wants to glorify and deify the player. It wants us to feel like we're not wasting our time playing it because it's all things. And the constant juggling of these elements, the result is kind of a mess. Pretty, entertaining, but lacking substance. Tokyo Mirage Sessions is blow for blow less intense, but it's more coherent. It cares more about its characters, and frankly, has the best rendition of Tiki in the entire series. Like, OG Tiki is tragic and fine as a plot point, yes, granted, but she doesn't really get to be much more than that. She comes in late game when the conflict is reaching a fevered pitch, has a melancholic bit of dialogue explaining her situation, then falls in line with the rest of the army. Even adult Tiki in Awakening, an admittedly tight competition for second place, has all the parts of her that make her interesting in both optional content and DLC. Here, Tiki is a constant presence in this game, and her character is more thoroughly built around her feeling isolated and inhuman. The resolution of her side story is genuinely kind of bittersweet, Itsuki stumbling into a way to make Tiki corporeal for a single day. It's kind of frustrating to get into main series Fire Emblem as a result, because these characters can be interesting, but the constraints of the games kind of demand that they won't be. These constraints don't exist here. You never really feel too much like you're leaving the main story to go and deal with a version of these characters that exist in a void, divorced from the main story. Because the fiction better supports investing in their career pursuits directly. I can't really explain this better without talking about the other side of this equation, so let's do that. So SMT fans are a weird bunch, mostly because I feel like the angriest, some of which I may have the misfortune of having in the audience right now, hi gamers, have noticed that I'm probably more into Persona than regular old Shin Megami Tensei, and like, fair enough, I'm not going to fight you too much on that front. If you're out there and you're miserable because you're sick of Persona 5 and this game showed up in the Nintendo Direct and it's not taking place in the post-apocalypse, I release you from this video. You're dismissed. I'm here, however, for the Persona crowd. If you're all going to invite the devil into your homes and compare this game to Persona explicitly, then we shall explore what that means, because one of my favorite series of games has kind of a lot to learn from your cringe anime game. So, I'm not going to rehash this too much. We get the major talking points already, though I will point out that one of the major recurring criticisms I've seen from SMT folks is that they're not really using the SMT part of the equation in the crossover, hilariously enough. Both houses insist on being ignored. No, the issue sitting in here is that Persona fans have been begging for a game that doesn't take place in high school, and apparently seem to be compelled to snub both Persona 2 and Tokyo Mirage Sessions. And yes, TMS is not Persona, we know this, but it offers a far more comprehensive and generous peek into this fiction than the radically different style of game that Persona 2 is. By virtue of this being a professional context, TMS is sort of proof of concept that you can, in fact, make a game about a bunch of ordinary youths who moonlight as brave heroes fighting horror terrors and not make it about high school stuff. Every impulse you can see in Persona shows up: weird humor about women, uncomfortable age gaps, your bro needing help to hit on girls, everyone on the team being into the main character, but almost every one of these impulses is dealt with a little more gracefully. Like let's start with a silly one. Toma, in one of his side quests, asks you to help him hit on girls. If this were a modern Persona, this would, 1, be a mandatory part of the main story, and 2, involve the girls of the team finding out about this and calling you and Toma pigs or whatever. Instead, Toma explains that his upcoming role is that of a charming guy, and the director wants him to appear flirtatious and confident to lure more women into the target demographic. And the resulting sequence is weirdly endearing. Toma is obviously clumsy and nervous, but the dialogue is never grotesque or crass, and Itsuki has more success by being direct and cool about asking girls that they want to hang out, and they're all, I guess, swayed by his autistic riz. Good for him. But some of this are much less flattering. It is, in fact, weird how Barry treats Mamori and Ellie and almost everyone. He's supposed to be really embarrassing, and I think he's the weakest link in the game by far. Sorry, Barry. It doesn't help that the game really firmly implies that basically every girl has the hots for Itsuki, and I think that may be a good enough intro to discuss something really important about our main character. So, remember Roy? Yeah, that's right. I talked about Roy for a reason, namely how he's kind of generic and nice in a way that rubs up poorly with the rest of the text of the game. He's thematically interesting, but more as a result of his position, less his character, which isn't particularly in depth. It's fine, but basically my first ever defensive TMS I made upon playing it is that Itsuki is less a self-insert MC like an SMT or Persona, a Fire Emblem main character from the old days. His personality is kind of similar to that of Marth or Roy or Seliph. Nice, supportive, likes peace and his friends, right? Well, I will kind of push back on that in a moment, but broadly that's a fair enough call to make. But it works in the context of TMS, a story that has a normal world. They aren't soldiers marching in a war, they're kids tasked with a dangerous mission, but that mission requires them to take their careers seriously. Itsuki doesn't know what he wants to do in the entertainment business, literally giving as generic an answer to the question as, I want to support my friends. Though through the game, the side quests, the main story, he kind of ends up the normie friend to a cluster of dramatic theater kids, and as a theater kid, I can tell you that we need those. He grounds everyone in the cast, and it's on the face of it kind of nice. He's a sweet generic boy, but the game accepts that fully and creates a world where his level-headed compassion and care are genuine boons to the team. Also, while I'm at it, he does have his own personality. It's not super complex, nothing in this game really is, except for the act of talking about it apparently, but he is the straight man to everyone else's comic nonsense. The game is pretty funny, actually, and all of your supporting party members get ample time to play up their own dramatic asses for Itsuki to bounce off of. Tsubasa, in learning how to be flirtatious in a commercial, chases down an infamous cat and meows at it in front of God and everyone, just like me. Toma is bad at flirting, flubbing his lines while Itsuki shows him up with acting like a normal person. Kiria, cool, serious Kiria, decides to try and kill the part of her that likes cute things, and it's played against Itsuki's nervous concern. Mamori keeps getting pushed around by her show's producer and Barry until she loses her shit thanks to Itsuki's encouragement. Ellie has an entire built-in tsundere act that basically requires Itsuki, and you'd think that anti-hero Yashiro, the cool man, the stoic outsider, would be deadly serious. Anyway, here's his first side quest where he passes out on the street because he's never had to take care of feeding himself and doesn't know where food comes from. I love this man. This wraps us back to the MC question, the self-insert question. Why is it, one commenter out there asks, that you can't romance any of the women? If this were Persona, you'd be able to. And I'm afraid that this mystery commenter is right, to the detriment of Persona. Let's just shelve the fact that this could reasonably include Tiki, who doesn't have a physical body and looks like a child, and Mamori, who's 11, and point out that Itsuki's cluelessness is a recurring element because it keeps the game from compromising the story. See, I've long held the belief that optional romance is in genres like these, while on some level potentially satisfying, and while they can give replay value or whatever, kind of make developing any given romance arbitrary. The best romances in Fire Emblem, in my humble opinion, are like Alm and Celica, simply because they can develop naturally through the story. Devoid of that, romance can end up feeling deliberately voyeuristic in these games. They are on some level revealing of a character, sure, they aren't completely made up out of nothing, but it's something that has no weight to the story outside of bespoke cutscenes for the player's satisfaction. Tokyo Mirage Sessions doesn't commit too hard into playing up Itsuki's romantic potential with any of the girls, and it's kind of to its credit. The game gets to feel a little more consistent as a result. The characters can harbor complex feelings that intersect in interesting ways, and also, like, let's be honest, it would be weird to reciprocate your boss's advances in a way the game actually allows, right? Well, I guess maybe not that weird. Like, Itsuki is, like, 18. Like, I guess that's a step up from most Persona games. Hey, why do I hear boss music? Oh, yeah, I wasn't fucking kidding about the censorship. You see, Tokyo Mirage Sessions is many things, but in the US version of the Wii U version of the game, and in every version on the Switch, the game is broken, fundamentally incomplete. You see, it's the victim of the cruel hand of censorship. Who knows who could have done such a horrid thing to a pure, innocent game that people definitely had a legitimate interest in? Probably Nintendo. Even if Atlus said that they did the localization, it was the monsters at Nintendo, those sick fucks. As a free speech absolutist, I find it appalling that such things would happen, and I'm not alone in this. See, for every angry fan bemoaning the loss of the crossover they made up in their heads, we have a warrior for truth and justice in these trailer comments, fighting against censorship.
This game is confirmed to be censored. Nintendo should just have led it with an M rating instead of cutting content for a T rating.
Thanks for censoring yet another game, Nintendo of America. You really never learn, do you?
Great! Just what we needed after what happened to Fates. More fucking censorship! Might as well start importing everything Nintendo makes from Japan.
Just so you know, by buying this game, you're supporting censorship in Western releases. A really heavy one. Not saying the game will be bad, but at least research a little about the product you'll get.
I'd like to inform Nintendo that the game is going to sell very poor because it is censored and we don't like censorship. We are going to leave the game on the shelves due to this stupid censorship.
Not going to buy this. I hate that you're censoring so much content because you think SJWs actually play these games. They don't. And censoring before asking is the great backstab. Was looking forward to this, but now I'm waiting for Persona 5. At least Sony won't ask Atlus to censor anything.
Tokyo Censored Sessions, sharp FE.
Was gonna buy this on Wii U, but then found out it was censored, so I ignored it. Was gonna buy this, but then I found out even the JP version is based off the censored US SJW version.
Just to let everyone know, Nintendo of America thinks that wedding dresses are too sexy, swimsuits are too sexy, cleavage is too sexy, hot springs are too sexy, pelvic bones are too sexy, 17-year-olds are too sexy, so they decided to remove all of those from the US release of Tokyo Mirage Sessions. What the fuck, Nintendo?
No censor, 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 no censor.
Considering how censored this game is gonna be, there's literally no reason to waste your money on an incomplete game, people. At least give Americans the option for the Japanese version of the game, Nintendo, instead of making sure the content you give us is watered down at best. Remember Fire Emblem Fates? I bought that used. Because I didn't want to contribute to what you were making. I'll be doing the same with this game.
Why would someone censor a fan service game? You are destroying the point of a game.
Inspiring stuff. Hey, by the way, here's all the stuff that was censored. Itsuki, Tsubasa, and Toma were aged up from 17 to 18. Eleonora was aged up from 16 to 17. They cut the swimsuit DLC. They changed the dialogue and outfits in the modeling section, and for Tsubasa's final side quest, they changed one boss and a couple minor enemies' models. And they altered the costume for Tsubasa's Feel video, leading to a cult classic of terminally online internet memes.
Not only did they remove her cleavage, but they also removed her vagina bones.
So, it's really tantalizing to just endlessly mock these guys, which I have been doing this whole time, but I think that since censorship is a common talking point circulated by the worst people you know on Twitter, I want to actually try and discuss it. To kick things off, really informed viewers may have noticed that I didn't bring up the changes to Kirya's Reincarnation video because that isn't censorship, no matter how much YouTube channel Censored Gaming wants it to be. Kirya's costume looked like that in development footage and was changed in every release version, and unless it comes out that Atlus or Nintendo of Japan insisted that she cover up her underwear in between the trailer and the release, that's a creative decision from the developers, not censorship. You can maybe make a tenuous argument that the devs censored themselves, but there's really nothing to support a read like that unless you earnestly believe that semi-naked women in fiction are the secretly held desire of every artist, and any act that results in putting a woman in more clothes is de facto an act of censorship. More to the point, censorship is kind of a weird beast to talk about in general. See, a lot of outrage media likes using it because censorship carries a lot of cultural weight, a weight that far outstrips its reality in many mundane cases, kind of like how people like to talk about trauma on the internet. In the absolute sense, yes, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, before it was released to international audiences, was censored, and I have spun myself in knots trying to figure out why the response to that in this case is to shrug my shoulders and point out that the censorship isn't really anything particularly noteworthy, without being accused of being biased because I'm some sort of prude who hates pure expression of sexuality or whatever. I actually want to dig into that a bit. Let's give the censorship crowd a fair shake here and talk about probably their best case. See, in Chapter 2, Tsubasa gets assigned to do a photo shoot, but in the original version it's specifically for gravura modeling, which is a genre of photos that are more risque, falling short of actual nudity. This changed into a more general photo shoot and focuses on Tsubasa's general anxiety and inexperience in the field as a whole, instead of her confidence in dressing in lingerie for a public shoot. I can see the argument being made here, but there's a problem with this setup, and it's that ultimately at the heart of it all, I've seen the uncensored versions of these scenes, of the costumes, I've seen Tsubasa's vagina bones, and also the actual worst change of the game, which was of them removing the lyrics in her video. Like, the shot composition feels so empty, and I didn't notice because there's, like, text all over the place framing it. Like, why would you do this, Atlas? But ultimately, none of this stuff is particularly substantial. Let's talk about horniness. To be brief and safe for YouTube, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, like the majority of Persona games, like all of Fire Emblem, lacks substance to any of their more titillating material, and I think the reason is kind of clear, right? When you look at the Maiden in Black from Demon's Souls, or Fran from Final Fantasy XII, or Kaine from Nier, there's a clear vision and intent to what's being expressed through their bodies. They are sexualized women, undeniably, but there's something there, something substantive and interesting to them. Fran is a bunny girl, but she has giant monster claws for hands and beats enemies to death with them. The Maiden in Black is blinded, but also barefoot. God, I talk about feet way too much on YouTube. I don't even have a foot fetish. Why are there feet in everything I play? I'm not going to opine on the quality or integrity at play in depicting these women in these ways. That's beyond the scope of this video. But when you journey back to Fire Emblem Land, you get... what? At the end of Conquest, you bounce off of Camilla's tits? Fire Emblem Heroes keeps making OCs that look like this and wanting to talk about having a baby with you. It's the horny sensibilities of a 13-year-old. It's trite, and that deals twin blows to the censorship argument. Perhaps the strongest case to be made for the censorship brigade here is that all of the stuff they got rid of is so silly, so immature, that the effort put into removing it feels arbitrary. Why would it matter to see Maiko on the Wii U in underwear laying on a couch? The model has nowhere near the fidelity to make her an actually tantalizing figure to stare at, and the game has nothing else going on in its head beyond the existence of Maiko in a bra. Unfortunately, the same lack of substance cuts both ways. Devoid of an explicit intent, without a vision and a passion, the game can only record the details of the experience. Tsubasa's costume and her pelvic bones don't really make a meaningful case on their own, so the localization team has to go, this is a sequence with a 17-year-old in a skimpy outfit, or this is a 17-year-old stripping down to her underwear in front of a bunch of boys, and realize that the stuff will probably net them an M rating, which would limit sales on an already risky product, so they change things. Kids grow to the legal age in most of North America, costumes get altered, they hem and haw on the swimsuit DLC before just getting rid of it. The culminating effect here becomes dire under this lens too, because the censorship is so trivial. The same logical breakdown that explains why it happens in the first place is damning for the detractors to it, who sound like they are desperate to have extremely tame boob pics and that they have to be from underage girls. Yikes. If you have an issue with the censorship at play here, ultimately the decision goes way above any particular villain you can point a finger at. You're angry at capitalism. Japanese media, when sent overseas, has a long history of localization changes. They wrote themselves into a bizarre corner with the Phoenix Wright games that now take place in the most Japan take on San Francisco or wherever they claim to be in ever, and that wasn't even to cover up a woman's body. This isn't an issue of moral panic, but an issue of markets and returns on investments. This is all to say that the censorship happened, but the complaints around it are trying to essentially steal valor. People hear censorship and think of political oppression, media being silenced for being too daring and provocative, and then you dig around and it's a complaint over a Stellar Blade costume being just a little less revealing than it was in a trailer or whatever. How does this thing happen, though? Like, hate mobs, outrage merchants, this stuff is commonplace, but there seems to be a rich vein in video games and the fandoms that crop up around them. Looking back on these comments, I'm feeling very lost. You can pull back and look objectively at what it is they're fighting for, and you can maybe correctly assume that some of these are bad faith actors, some people are here just to stir a frenzy, because it can't be a genuine anger here. Like, what has been removed from these games doesn't really matter to the game as a whole, and people are here lamenting this game, saying that it was butchered. They have put an obscene weight to this, to the point that the result seems categorically absurd. How is it that gamers feel this entitled to the granular integrity of these games? The problem with this, with looking at these complaints in totality, is that Tokyo Mirage Sessions starts to feel emblematic of a bigger issue. Beyond the bickering about anime titties, beyond the complaints over a version of the game entirely made up in the minds of fans, you can kind of start to see an issue, right? Like, there's this habit in discussions about video games that gets kind of selfish, right? The game doesn't do the thing you want it to. Maybe it's not the crossover of your dreams. Maybe it's DLC that's too hard and everyone wants to call these faults of the developer, using the game as a means to talk about some kind of grievance. Nintendo is notorious for censorship, you see, so instead of talking about Tokyo Mirage Sessions as a game, it's a prop. Instead of meeting the art where it's at, there's a compulsion, a desire to instead reframe the entire conversation. Use the art to talk about your grievances. Aren't FromSoft fans a little too snobby and into their own shit for these games that are bullshit hard? Isn't it insulting that Atlus and Intelligent Systems would personally insult their fans like this? These kinds of ideas, insisting on your own narrative as correct and the games and their developers as out of line, failing us, it's a weirdly selfish bent towards talking about games as things built to service your wants. The conversation around them, as a result, can get lost. Let me explain a little. I started this project partially because I think the game is just better than everyone gave it credit for, but in going through these scenes, I ran into a weird thought. Tokyo Mirage Sessions doesn't really talk about how to become a pop idol, what sort of demands the industry puts on the performers, their expectations and agency. And I've half remembered at the time that there was an article that was out about the exploitative nature of like the pop idol industry, and a voice rang out in my head that asked that if that makes this game bad on some level. Its kind of superficial relationship with its own premise is both par for the course in a lot of anime, which usually defer the mundanities of cultivating a skill or working in a particular field to instead use the context as a means to discuss more sentimental interpersonal things. You know, can Tsubasa overcome her anxieties? Can Kirya be cute and cool professionally? Does Toma have the hero's spirit that will get him into Sentai? In a way, you can conceive of this game as socially irresponsible, a love letter to an industry that ignores its harsh realities. Is that good criticism? As I work and toil on this video, I come often face to face with my own intentions, my own urges to wield these games like props. In a way, I have to recognize that in essence, all criticism uses the art, warps it around a narrative, builds a story out of a story. Can I fault the people truly for mythologizing a hypothetical version of SMTXFE? Is our only option as critics a mindless devotion to the game or a cynical twisting of it to suit our needs? Well, no, right? There's more to the world than this kind of deep cynicism. I think it's important to take a step back and look at what is accomplished in some critical understandings of art, but at the heart of it, the essential key is the why. Anyone can make an argument, can problematize art, can take a piece of work and use it to cast wild aspersions on its creator, but an essential part of criticism is the capacity to ask yourself why you are doing this. What is it about these things that compel you to speak? Looking at these commenters, these videos I've been barbing, the general state of people loudly opining about shit on social media, is that it's easy to be dispassionate. It's really easy to get angry about a thing and find a cheap way to say, well, it is just this way. This game is objectively bad, or this is a serious topic. There is a desire in the root of this social media nightmare to deny your own investment, your own bias in what you want to talk about. It's a way to protect your own ego, and I just wholeheartedly believe that you have to be willing to put yourself on the page as a critic, or else we're going to be stuck spinning our wheels trying to chemically solve art, fix the representation discourse, draft an objective measure of what good is. These are ancient and impossible ventures, and the only way forward is honesty and vulnerability. So, let's be honest. Staring at this game for this long, looking at all of this, I kind of can't help but think about my own cynicism. It's Pride Month, you see, and while this is probably only going to go public after Pride Month's over, I know that I respond to a lot of wholesome, encouraging, sweet, supportive art with a little bit of a bristle. I think in the grand scheme of things, the pursuit to make validation the end-all be-all of a piece of art can lend itself to really superficial creations, and superficial art that can itself be easily adapted into a corporate structure. It's really easy to watch as Disney brags about announcing their first ever gay character again and again, or to see discourse about the existence of a character played by someone who isn't white or cis, but these conversations ring hollow. Art is more than the chemical composition of diversity. It has to be meaningful. Right? Art has to put something out there, and yet I can look at something as cheesy and ridiculous as Tokyo Mirage Sessions and find it surprisingly charming. Look, shut up. I'm not above whimsy. I like Steven Universe. Come on. No, more seriously, there's a difference. I'm not saying that Tokyo Mirage Sessions is secretly edgy or a masterpiece, but the sheer act of owning itself, of its intent to be a kind of no-stakes love letter to performance, it speaks to me a lot. It's weird, it's troubling at times, it's stupid in a lot of very real ways, but it is also unafraid to just genuinely own its unabashed love for the arts. They put a shocking amount of effort. They span like the 3 different animation styles. They try to get in as many different kinds of art that's part of Japanese culture, because they started development with a weird idea and they just rolled with it. See, I've been playing clips from this video, What Happened to Tokyo Mirage Sessions, where the YouTuber theorizes on how the production came together. It's not very good, in my humble opinion, particularly because a cursory look through fucking Wikipedia can show you that the concept was developed based off of kami-oroshi, a ritual in Japanese shamanism that suggests that ritual dancers can commune with spirits. Look, I even found a quote from Atlas producer Shinji Takada, and I will quote this one. It's too late in the process for me to get someone else to read this, so I'll take this one. Quote, "This is why the characters are all entertainers. In Japan, similar to Greek mythology, there's the idea of the gods being connected to the arts. It's a shamanistic element that's been interpreted by Atlas. The idea is Japanese priestesses would dance and the dancing would bring them closer to the gods. We wanted to spin this in an Atlas way, so all the characters in the game have some connection to the arts, and that connection and their ability to express themselves attracts the Mirages to them. People who are good at singing or dancing or acting have really strong bonds with Mirages." And I think ultimately it doesn't need to be more than that. Art doesn't have to be grave and serious and brutal, nor does it have a social imposition to be a good moral compass for society. I think that framing art as a service, whether it be for your satisfaction or to instruct a public on appropriate morals, limits the potential of art as a whole. And sometimes what's limited by this isn't profound and meaningful and beautiful. Sometimes it's just this. Sometimes it's something that wants to do a specific thing, indulge in an idea to its fullest, even if the rest of the product isn't particularly interesting. That's fine. That's what we should have the capacity to accept, because in this specific case, I think both fandoms can learn a lot from this game. You can even still dislike it, that's fine, but think more about why you do, because an honest answer to that question is going to be more meaningful than any kind of hot take that you can whip up to protect your ego. And honestly, isn't that Tokyo Mirage Sessions? For all the talk I've had about the game's incurious relationship to the tangible material details of the career it's ostensibly about, the message, simple and easily digestible as it is clear. If you're going to perform, if you're going to put yourself out there, be a musician, a critic, an actor, whatever, you can't do it from a place of safety. You can't protect yourself from the world while trying to change it, and real strength comes from that sincerity, from tackling these problems, these goals, these ambitions full-heartedly. If you're the type that needs to hear T-rated, cheesy, sentimental art telling you to be true to yourself, well, here it is. If you hate Tokyo Mirage Sessions, don't hide behind a veil, pretend that you're stating objective facts. Don't try and pretend that your dislike doesn't come from you on some level. It's not weakness to have opinions about art, so stop thinking that it must be. Thank you for watching. Play us out. First, I want to give a really, really big shout out to everyone who contributed voices for this. I have linked all of their information in the description below. Please check them all out. Find them, follow them, support them. They really went above and beyond to help me for this video. Thank you all so much. Special thanks to my patrons, Alexi Angelica, Athena Stripes, Bees Louise, Blair Renix, Blueberries in My Coffee, Cole Brayfield, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Foxy Hex, Gail Simmons, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lapin, Nurai the Red Marked, Professor Bopper, Saint Rawberry, Thomas Volpez, Trade Good, Valerian Wraithwall, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.